Hi, welcome back. Our previous lesson was on demand elasticity and revenue. Today, we'll be looking at other demand elasticities. So, we've talked about price elasticity a lot in our previous lessons, while we defined it as how responsive quantity demand is to the change in price of a good. But the question here is, what happens when other factors apart from price changes? Example, what happens to your quantity demand when your income changes? What happens to your quantity demand when the price of other goods changes? That is what we will be looking at in today's class. So the first other demand elasticity is cross price elasticity of demand. And it measures how responsive quantity demand of a good is to change in price of another good. So for instance, if you have two goods, how responsive is demand for good A to the price of good B? In the formula for calculating cross price elasticity of a good is the percentage change in price of the good divided by the percentage change in price of another good. So, for instance, if the price of good X, let's say, price of good X rises by 10% and quantity of good Y, so when the quantity of good Y falls by 20%, then we can calculate the cross price elasticity for good Y as the percentage change in quantity demand, in this case, which is 20%, divided by the percentage change in price of good X, which is 10%. So this will give us minus 2. What this means is that if the price of good X rises by 10%, quantity demanded of good Y will fall by 20%, leading us to a cross price elasticity of minus 2. So let's look at another example before we delve into what the magnitude of elasticity tell us. So if the price of good Z were to rise by 40% and quantity demand of good Y rises by 8%, then we can calculate the cross price elasticity for good Y, which is the percentage change in quantity, which is 8%, divided by the percentage change in the price of good Z, which is 40%. So in this case, our cross price elasticity is 0.2. Now you can see that in both calculations for the cross price elasticity for good Y, we had a minus here and a positive here. So the sign of the cross price elasticity of demand tells you something important. When the cross price elasticity is positive, it means the two goods are substitutes. So in this example, good Z and good Y are substitutes. Example of these goods are coffee and tea. These goods are used in place of each other. So there's a positive relationship between the price of good Z and the demand of good Y. If the price of good Z increases, you'll buy less of it and buy more of good Y. And if the price of good Z were to reduce, you buy more of it and then less of good Y. So this makes the two goods substitute and their cross price elasticity will be positive. Now, if the cross price elasticity for two goods are negative, then the goods are complement. These goods are used together. For example, a smartphone and a phone case. So when the price of a phone were to increase, you'll buy less of it. And because you used a phone and a phone case together, if you buy less of a phone, you buy less of a phone case. So when you calculate the cross price elasticity, you get negative. So we can use this simple diagram to show when two goods are substitute or complement. When the cross price elasticity of two goods is 0, then the goods are independent or unrelated good. Example, Pepsi and shoes. You don't consume them together. You do not buy one in place of each other. So the price increase of one will not affect the quantity demand of the other. Now this is it for cross price elasticity, which is how responsive your quantity demand is to changes in the price of a related good. Now let's look at what happens to quantity demand when your income changes. This is what we call the income elasticity of demand. It measures how responsive quantity demand is to changes in your income. And the formula is percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in income. For instance, if your income rises by 10% and quantity demand rises by 40%, assuming this is good X, then the income elasticity for good X is 40%, which is your percentage change in quantity demand, divided by 10%, which is your percentage change in income. In this case is 4. Now let's look at another example. For good Y. If your income increases by 10% and the quantity demand of good Y reduces by, say, 30%, then your income elasticity for good Y will be minus 30%, which is your change in quantity demand, divided by your change in income, which is minus 3 in this case. Now, just as the sign for the cross price elasticity told us whether the two goods were substitute or complement, the sign for the income elasticity also tells us something important. That is whether the good is an inferior good or a normal good. If you calculate income elasticity and it's positive, it means the good is a normal good. So in this example, good X is a normal good. Now we've talked extensively about what normal and inferior goods are in our previous lessons, but just a recap: the normal goods are goods in which your demand increases when your income increases. So in this case, there's a positive relationship between your income and the demand for the good. So that's why our income elasticity is positive. Now if you calculate income elasticity and it's negative, then the good is an inferior good. So in this example, good Y is an inferior good. So an inferior good is just a good that your demand decreases as your income increases, and your demand increases as your income decreases. So there's a negative relationship between your income and your demand for the good. Now we can also demonstrate income elasticity of demand with this diagram. If the income elasticity is positive, then the good is a normal good. If it's less than 0, then the good is an inferior good. So this is all we have for our lesson on other demand elasticities. Our next lesson will be on price elasticity of supply. If you enjoyed today's lesson, consider subscribing. Thank you.